Good morning again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this morning's webinar from the Pet Sustainability Coalition. My name is Melissa Bauer, and I am the Director of Sustainability and Strategic Initiatives at PSC. Thanks so much for joining us. While we were having people join the call this morning, we launched a poll. We checked to see are companies measuring greenhouse gas emissions at your company, and only 19% of those on the call this morning have said yes. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. We'll have some great tools and resources for those of you who are measuring emissions, but a lot of really good education and information on how to start for those who don't know if they are or aren't measuring emissions. So let's jump into our conversation today. Just before we jump into today's content, just a little bit of level setting about the platform today. So you joined the webinar this morning in attendee mode, which means microphones and videos are off. However, we have Pet Sustainability Coalition team monitoring the chat. So if you have any technical problems whatsoever or any problems, please don't hesitate to drop a message for the PSC team in the chat. We also encourage everyone to let us know where they're calling in from today in that chat as well. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation today, but there's no reason to wait to ask them. We'll be taking questions at the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little chat feature that says Q&A on it with a little text box, and that's where we're going to be taking questions, and please feel free to drop those in there at any time. Finally, a recording of our call today and the slides will be sent to everyone on today's call, so no need to be frantically taking screenshots or anything like that. So a brief introduction to the Pet Sustainability Coalition. For those of you who might not know us, we are a nonprofit industry association that works, obviously, in the pet space. We serve a dual mission, which I'll chat about in just a minute, but we work with over 200 members in the pet industry all throughout the supply chain, everyone from suppliers and manufacturers to retailers, distributors, and the like. We're also a global organization. We have about 60% of our membership in North America, another 30% in Europe and the EU, and we also have members in Australia, Asia, and South America as well. And as I mentioned, we serve a dual purpose. So we work with each of our 200 plus members to help them measure, improve, and celebrate their sustainability performance for whatever it means for their individual business goals and culture. We also work to bring the industry together to address large-scale environmental, social issues that are too big for any one company or any one sector of the pet industry to solve. And our topic today kind of spans both of these subject areas. So with that, I am really thrilled to introduce Jenna Pugliese. She is the Director of Client Strategy at Native, a public benefit corporation. And Jenna is going to be telling us some really, really great information about carbon accounting, greenhouse accounting, scope 1, 2, 3, offsets, insets, and all kinds of things. And then please stay tuned after Jenna's talk, because at PSC, we have some exciting announcements to make about partnerships and collaborations that PSC has formed with Native Energy and how you can get involved with that. So Jenna, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Mute. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and start with carbon offsets. I'll call it 101. We dive a little deeper into maybe some 201 and look forward to your feedback and questions at the end. But as mentioned, this is an introduction to carbon offsets, and we will walk through an agenda of an introduction to us as a company, why we're here, what is a carbon footprint, what is an offset. I forgot to update this table of contents completely, so some examples of carbon offset projects, and we actually will talk about some insetting and carbon offset claims. So just a quick introduction to Native. We've been in business for 20 years. Our mission is to catalyze new climate action. And in fact, we really pride ourselves on catalyzing change where projects may be stalled either for financial or other reasons. And we're also a certified B Corp. So we've invested over $40 million in impact projects, spanning 80 plus projects that have been built, verified, and certified, with the equivalent of 8 million tons of CO2 reduced or removed. A few of our partners are listed here that we're really excited to work with. We got our start with some companies like Cliff Bar and Ben & Jerry's, and have expanded to over 200 clients ourselves. So our approach is predominantly through our help build project model. Again, when we look for projects that are really stalled, we look for, we found an alternative solution to getting these projects off the ground versus more traditional carbon funding that would often be deployed year over year for project components. We actually leverage an upfront funding model and therefore an upfront support model. So again, we find projects with a funding barrier. We find clients that are willing to commit and go through a very intense due diligence process. And then we execute project investment, like I mentioned, on an upfront basis, allowing us to recognize the full project benefits over the lifetime. This also helps create a causal role for supporting companies. So, by providing that upfront funding, you are, able to discuss a causal role to carbon or climate action over the life of that project. Again, we're really excited about our existing partnerships and one of our newest being Pet Sustainability Coalition. Our partners are what help us make that upfront investment in carbon projects. So we'll start by what is a carbon footprint. I love this chart from the World Resources Institute Greenhouse Gas Protocol, showing the inputs and outputs of scope 1, as well as the downstream and upstream scope 3 emissions, and in the middle being scope 2. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in the next few slides. So scope 1 is very specifically your owned emissions. So anything that you have a bill for that there's direct combustion at your action. So facility thermal consumption. So if you have an office or a warehouse, any place that again is associated with your business where you're paying the gasoline, heating oil, natural gas bills, that would be considered scope 1. Scope 1 also includes your owned vehicles. So not so much any vehicles that are part of transportation or shipping of goods, but anything again where you're doing the filling up and you're burning those fuels in your vehicles directly. So the next scope is scope 2, and it's electricity. Slightly different. Again, you are likely paying that utility bill or paying through a landlord, etc. But the emissions are not considered direct because in this case, the emissions are generated offsite where the electricity is produced. And the impact of electricity emissions varies greatly based on the inputs to the electric grid. So in some locations, a grid is very renewable and the emissions factors for that grid will be very low. Other places, coal heavy locations, etc., your scope 2 per megawatt hour might be much higher. And then scope 3 gets really messy. It's everything else. And again, it can be both upstream and downstream inputs. So it can be your travel as a corporation. It can be your raw materials, especially food companies that have inputs, both, from the actual products as well as the shipping of those products, any third-party processing. So if you are not directly responsible for doing your processing, that would also be included. The transportation is mentioned, and then also the use of your products. what is happening as a direct result of that. So some drivers, again, travel to and from destinations, employee commuting. I added a few specific to potentially the pet industry, being ingredients and pet foods, end of life of products, as in, collars and leashes, and also the raw materials, both from packaging as well as, again, products. If you're creating a leash from either a plastic offset or wool material, anything that inputs into those raw materials. And I'll mention calculating a carbon footprint is as much an art as it is a science. Scope 3 is the scope 1 and 2 can be fairly direct. Again, they're based on your utility bills and the best information you can gather for that direct, inputs. However, scope 3 has to be defined. And so I do not expect you to read or get out your magnifying glass to dive into this. But this is just 4 pages of 182 pages of the technical guidance for calculating scope 3 emissions from the greenhouse gas protocol. And I thought it was important to recognize the complexity of scope 3 emissions. The first step is defining your potential emissions, and then, really diving into what data is available, how do you get it? That can often also be a challenge, reaching out to all sorts of members of your supply chain. And it's worth noting that if we as a world were all doing the right thing, we would only have to look at, our scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is actually made up of emissions that are a result of other people. So they're other people's or other organizations' scope 1 and 2 emissions. However, in order to make claims around carbon neutrality, is often important to dive into that scope 3. But this process of scope 3 is one Native actually is unable to usually support with our internal resources. And so, Pet Sustainability Coalition is a great resource for that, but can take hundreds of hours depending on how large you are and how big your supply chain is and how far your products go. Collecting data is, again, often cumbersome, challenging, and hard to define. I've included a link here to the full greenhouse gas protocol if anybody wants to spend a weekend diving into the 182 pages. So what is a carbon offset? By definition, I apologize, but I'm going to read it. Carbon offsets are a practical and effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and address climate change. They are emission reduction removal credits for actions that help combat climate change while caring for communities and aiding in social development. Somebody mentioned the quote listed at the bottom once, essentially thinking about carbon offsets as outsourcing your climate action. So we don't consider carbon offsets to be a long-term solution. It is part of a sustainability plan, and they receive feedback externally often about being a source of kind of a right to pollute, but we really strongly believe that they're just an outsourced way to address your climate solutions. So again, how they work. On the left, there's your emissions. You define your footprint, and then you can do your own actions within that footprint, either through efficiency or scale or renewables, etc. And then if for any emissions that you can't offset that way, you can look at carbon offsets for that balancing piece. So at a high level, carbon offsets, like I mentioned, are a piece of a sustainability plan. They're a way to address currently unabated emissions, and they're a tool to meet carbon reduction goals. We do not consider them a license to pollute, a long-term solution, tangible, or the same as our renewable energy credit. If there's any questions on that at the end, I'm happy to get into it. But I also often explain they're not the best cocktail party fodder or easy to explain to your friends and family, but they are becoming a much more discussed part of climate action, and I think that they're a really important piece to a sustainability plan. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of examples of carbon offset projects in Native's portfolio, so you can kind of wrap your head around the different projects that are out there and how they're working in the real world to address emissions. So our first project is our Northern Great Plains Regenerative Grazing Project. We might hear a little bit about this later as it relates to the Pet Sustainability Coalition. This is the project that they support. And again, it's focused in Montana, although expanding, which is why it's now Northern Great Plains. We are working with cattle ranchers producing both beef and leather to manage their herds in a way that allows regeneration of soil and flora to allow for the sequestration of soil carbon. So this is actually a soil carbon sequestration project. It is also a nature-based solutions project. If you have, depending on how in tune you are with kind of the sustainability world, these are really hot topics right now. And so we're really proud of this project. We're currently working with 6 ranchers and expanding with hopes to get up to 1 million acres in the near future. Another project just to touch on quickly is our Medford Springs Avoided Conversion Project. So this project centers around a large piece of land that was under imminent threat of being converted to agriculture land, and therefore a large conservation easement was put on the land to protect it in perpetuity. And so also another just example, this is a avoided conversion project. The emissions avoided are based on what would have been emitted had the land been converted to agriculture versus what it's now able to recuperate, being able to grow wild. And then another just example of projects is our Capricorn wind project located in Texas. This is a wind farm. It provides local employment. It's on agricultural land, so it allows some additional payments to farmers and the community. It is kind of one of the original carbon offset projects, and again, just to show a little bit of the breadth of projects in Native's portfolio. We have additional projects in agriculture, nature-based solutions, energy, clean water, etc. So this is just a high-level summary of a few of the projects that we've supported through the years. So looking at carbon offsets, looking at projects, carbon neutral is another kind of hot topic. Carbon neutral is one of a few claims or goals that can be used to communicate your efforts on behalf of the climate. So I think it's important just to take a quick look at some of the other potential ways that claims are made. Many businesses use the terms net zero, carbon neutral, and climate neutral interchangeably, but it's important to understand the nuanced differences to set clear, actionable goals. So carbon neutrality may refer to zeroing out CO2 emissions through reductions and removal. Net zero goes beyond CO2 and encompasses all greenhouse gas emissions. And climate neutrality, on the other hand, considers all human impacts that affect the climate. Oops, too far. So when making a carbon offset claim, we feel like it's very important that the claim is accurate, transparent, and again, transparency goes very far into how you've defined your scope 1, 2, and 3 footprint, and easily understood by those that may be reading it. So despite the lack of mandated standards for voluntary carbon offsets, marketers should always avoid making false or misleading environmental claims. This is a requirement of much government legislation around the world, often in trading standards or consumer protection law, as well as forming the basis of the green guides, so organizations with a global presence can apply the same principles to all their reporting environmental claims worldwide. It's worth noting that although a claim may not be deliberately intended to mislead, it can be deemed unlawful if it is likely or liable to mislead the average consumer. So the utmost care should be taken to avoid inadvertently or carelessly making misleading claims. And I'll touch on really quickly our approach to scope 3 offsetting or insetting, depending on the exact approach. So we share our expertise as you set your scope 3 goals. Again, those can be neutrality, science-based targets, potentially both. And we work with you to chart your course to achieve those goals. So, starting on your left-hand side, we, always encourage best management practices at the onset of your sustainability plan. And then to look at scope 1 and 2 reductions. Again, scope 1 and 2, a little bit easier to get your arms around defining, and then really highlighting where your largest impact is and potentially addressing those through innovation and efficiency prior to any offsets or insets. The difference between offsets and insets are where the action takes place. So insets are carbon or climate action that happens within your direct supply chain. So if you knew you were sourcing your beef for your dog food from Montana farmers, that could actually be an inset project, even though it was developed prior to your knowledge. That could also be an offset project if it's outside your supply chain and however just may tell a great story because you're supporting, again, a potential supply chain. And insets are defined by country. I think that's important to note too, that, we don't expect, a pound of beef to be tracked from a ranch all the way to its end use. So if you are supplying beef from the US, you can likely, tell the story that is part of your supply chain. The more regional, the better, of course. And then envision your climate solution and we will build it. We have, expertise in energy and atmosphere, nature-based solutions, water, cooking and food, as well as transportation projects. So our expertise really spans the, majority of supply chain solutions. So, happy to always entertain conversations more around that insetting opportunity as well. So I realize I actually was pretty quick here, but happy to support any questions now or via email or phone.
Thank you, Jenna. We got a lot of really great questions coming in the chat. I will encourage everyone, if you have any questions for Jenna, I know this is a really hot-based topic. Be sure that you are answering or dropping those questions into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So as Jenna mentioned, they have a lot of Native Energy has a lot of different carbon offsetting programs. And here at the Pet Sustainability Coalition, we're really excited and partner to partner with Native Energy. And moving forward, we are excited that we will be including carbon or plastic offsets at every icon level member. So each of our icon level members is already actively working towards carbon or plastic offsets, which is really exciting. We are partnering with Native Energy on the regenerative beef grasslands project up in Montana, which is a fantastic opportunity for all of our companies in the pet food and treat space. As you may know, if you want to learn more, we're happy to send you that information. But as you may know, the Pet Sustainability Coalition works very closely advocating for and working with many different regenerative agriculture organizations. So this project directly aligns with our goals as a membership and within our organization. The other piece of fantastic news is you do not have to be an icon level member to participate. So we're committed to building momentum and building action through coalitions together. So any PSC member, if you are not an icon level member, but would like to add on carbon or plastic offsets to be part of this exciting program or a plastic offsetting program that is available, I just encourage you to reach out to your member services specialists and they will help you coordinate that. And then we're really excited to be reporting moving forward on kind of the combined impact of the Pet Sustainability Coalition movement. So before we get into questions, I just want to point out one thing. This is part 2 of our carbon accounting webinar. we see a lot of questions coming in around kind of how do we determine what is scope 1, what is scope 2, how should we measure? I'm going to really encourage you to check out part 1 of our series we did with WSP, who is a consulting firm who helped write the greenhouse gas protocol, and Open Farm, which is a PSC member and pet food and treat brand, who is one of the first companies in the pet industry really publishing full scope 1, 2, 3 emissions and science-based targets for reduction strategies. So really going to encourage you to check out that recording, and we will post a link to how to access that recording in the chat feature. But we have so many questions coming in, which is fantastic. So I will stop screen sharing, and then invite Jenna to come back online. And then we've got a question, Jenna. What is the typical price of 1 ton carbon offset? I know that can be a little tricky to answer depending on the project, right?
Exactly. So, typical price is, I would say, fluctuates right now between $8 and $20. There are really high technology carbon removals that you may have seen, where the actual technology is generated to pull CO2 out of the air, that can be upwards of $200 to $500 a ton. I will note that the market been in strong demand, with a lot of organizations really commendably making carbon commitments and investing in offsets. And so, the low hanging fruit of the really inexpensive offsets has been bought up. So this is the way we expect the market to work, that the low hanging fruit and the least expensive offsets are purchased by early adopters. And then as more people come into the market, the price will continue to rise. And there are some projections that even the projects kind of in our portfolio might be upwards of $25 to $50 in the next 5 years. Our current pricing on average is, I would say, $15 a ton. Again, project dependent, depending on the technology, the practices. We base our project costs predominantly on cost of doing business for the projects.
Thanks. I love this question. Jenna, what is the time horizon for carbon offsets? Is this something you buy once a year and then renew in the next year, or have you bought them and it's a one-time purchase?
So yeah, we anticipate most of it's up to the end user, right? How you quantify and how you are using offsets as part of your sustainability plan. It is typical practice for most of our supporting companies to buy year over year. So, whether that's proactively by estimating your footprint in a given year to be able to say you've done the offsetting up front, or retroactively at the end of the year. So if you can imagine, October through March timeline for us is very busy. And both allow for reconciliation. So if you wanted to purchase up front, you can absolutely come back at the end of the year, make sure all your your assumptions were correct, and that you've really done a positive covering of your whole footprint. And that can go both ways too, in that if you've overcommitted, you can apply offsets to the next year, and if you've undercommitted, you can kind of make up the difference there. So it is usually an annual purchase, again, kind of as it fits in your sustainability plan. We ironically, as a business, want to work our way out of that. I think we're a long way off, because there's a lot of action to take place between now and then. But ideally, everybody's footprint has internal action that or addresses the footprint within their control, and carbon offsets become a smaller and smaller piece over time.
Fantastic. Jenna, can you please expand a bit on what to be mindful of when communicating on carbon neutrality achievements and goals, so as to not make them misleading? This
Sure.
is a great question.
Yeah, I think, again, being really transparent and having available the details of how you've defined your footprint. So again, scope 1 and 2 being fairly straightforward. However, if you're doing any estimations, one of the kind of stumbling blocks we've come across recently, and probably can't have a webinar without mentioning the pandemic, is work from home. So me sitting in my office here in Burlington, Vermont, which is now my home, has, you know, different implications to natives' carbon footprint than being in the office once did. So, you know, there is sometimes even now estimations in, or always maybe, in scope 1 and 2, but being really transparent in how you've made those estimations and how you've defined the footprint and what's been included when you've offset that portion. So, you know, just again, providing even in like a tedious amount of information available, and that can be a link. So saying you're carbon neutral and then an asterisk, you know, here's how we did it is perfectly acceptable. There are also FTC guidelines that I can't reiterate for you, but we do have general counsel on staff who's kind of intimately familiar with those guidelines and can provide support for anybody that accesses carbon offsets through us.
Great, thanks, Jenna. We have so many questions. I'm loving it. We're going to get to as many as we can. Jenna, can you talk about the verified carbon standard? How was it developed and what is it?
So the verified, there are several, I don't know an exact number of carbon registries that provide methodologies for generating carbon offsets. One thing I've learned being in this business for just under 2 years is it's not simple, which is great, right? Because again, they're not tangible, offsets are not tangible. And so, you know, understanding what standards they have to meet, I think is really important for those that support them. The verified carbon standard is just one of several registries that exist. The big ones being Verified Carbon Standard, or VERA, it's got 2 names. The Climate Action Reserve, the American Carbon Registry, and Gold Standard. Those are kind of the high level, most accepted, longest in place action or registries. And I feel like there was a little bit of a second part that I may have missed.
I think you got it. I think you got it.
How are they formed? I don't
Yeah, how are they formed?
Yeah, I believe they're all nonprofit organizations. I can include some links to them so people see how the registries and methodologies work and are created. And the methodologies under them are often created actually in collaboration with organizations like ours or project proponents. We've been involved in actually helping write standards, which is really a great approach to the on the ground efforts and how those translate to carbon standards.
Great, thank you, Jenna. I will also put in a little pitch. There are 6 or 7 international organizations that work in verified carbon standards, and we covered that in the first part of the webinar. So once again, I would recommend going back and checking that out. They're all in accordance with the International Greenhouse Gas Reporting Protocol. So excited about that. I love this question. We didn't really get into RECs during this call, but we've got a question that says, how would you choose to go the REC route or the carbon offsetting route? So Jen, if you don't mind quickly kind of explaining, if someone says a REC, what they're talking about, and then what's your recommendation?
Yeah, so RECs are renewable energy credits. They are generated by the construction of renewable energy projects, be wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, etc. The standards for those projects are less rigorous than carbon offsets. So, it really is any new renewable generation potentially can qualify for a renewable energy credit. And while we do believe that renewable energy credits are a strong signal to the energy market to include more renewable energy, that less stringent standard makes us think there's less impact from both the project as well as maybe less need for the funding itself. The carbon standards actually require that you prove that the funding was needed. And that's called additionality for anybody that's heard that term. And so there is not an additionality requirement for renewable energy credits. Renewable energy credits only can apply to scope 2. And you can choose both options for scope 2. So you can quantify the emissions based on where your electricity is generated and look at offsetting with carbon offsets, or you can look at your direct megawatt hour and purchase renewable energy credits based on that. Historically, renewable energy credits have been much less expensive, even with that conversion rate. So I think it's sort of safe to say that in most areas, it's about 1 megawatt hour is half a ton of CO2 equivalent. Again, it depends on where that electricity is generated. But so if you had a REC that was half the price of an offset, they would essentially translate to the same cost. In even recent history, as recently as 2019, Green E certified RECs, which are kind of a nationally known product, were $1. We saw them a real strong run on the market that took prices up to $8 recently. So again, that equates to like a $16 project, which is really in line with that pricing I mentioned before. So if you're looking to communicate impact, we strongly recommend carbon offsets. Again, RECs can be a more affordable way to reduce your scope 2 impact. We do at Native have a renewable energy portfolio where, again, we kind of address that impact by looking at our own small scale community-based projects that have often additional benefits like solar farms that have pollinator habitat, or where there's goats or other livestock being grazing. So, there's some great stories there, and we, are happy to offer that product where people really want the renewable energy credit. But generally, our philosophy is more centered on offsets based on the impact they generate and the signals to the market.
All right, thank you. All right, we've got a question, and I'm going to take a stab at it first, but then I'm going to pass it over to you, Jenna. Okay. So we got a question that said, do you help companies work together to plan and implement in-setting projects for shared co-packers or supply chain partners? So the quick pitch that I want to do before is, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, a lot of the work that the Pet Sustainability Coalition does is with individual members. However, a huge amount of work that the Pet Sustainability Coalition does is outside of one big membership. And this is where our work around sustainable proteins come in. This is where our work around sustainable packaging and many other things come in. So this is something that, we are heavily involved in, and, building those relationships and kind of bringing members together to the benefit of all. So if you have specific things that you're going to want to work on, I'm going to really strongly suggest you reach out to your member service specialist as a member of PSC. And if you're not a member of PSC, I'm really going to recommend that you check out kind of the industry-wide work that we have and how you can get involved, but also just come join as a member. But also, Jenna, going to toss this one to you. Do you want to talk about kind of Native Energy's work around insetting?
Sure. So yes, we work with supply chains. So if we were working with one large company, again, to name Ben & Jerry's being an easy example to talk through, dairy is obviously a large input for them. So we are working directly with the farms that supply their milk to, in most cases, reduce methane or capture methane and use it as a biofuel. So, we absolutely, as an insetting, part of the insetting conversation, will work with a company to identify their supply chain, where their products are coming from, who the project partners could be. So, again, the farms directly in the case of Ben & Jerry's, or, working in cocoa, who are the cocoa farmers, et cetera. And then, identifying ways to improve their practices. Again, in the case of dairy, it's often methane reduction. We've also looked at biochar and other kind of implementation methods to reduce or avoid carbon. And then, identify, again, it's important for us to identify project partners that are willing to sign on. We don't own the farms, nor do you likely. If you do, that's even better. But I would also say, Melissa, to your point, that for smaller organizations, one of the things that's very much on our wish list is to collectively find supplies, either directly with insetting or just with scope 3 emissions, or smaller organizations that would contribute to one project under our help build to make collective action within a designated supply chain. So also welcome that conversation.
Thank you, Jenna. And as I mentioned, we're working on that exact thing, working on regenerative beef and agriculture in Montana, and a huge number of our members at PSC I know are sourcing beef from North America. So that inherently would be an exciting project, and we sincerely invite you to come be a part of this project and this movement, and help drive that impact together. Well, we answered as many questions as we could. I know that there's a lot more. So what I would really love is, please let us know what you thought of our webinar today, and the kind of content that you would like to see in the future. And then I would just like to add, I know that carbon offsetting and greenhouse gas and carbon neutrality, it's one of the fastest growing trends that we see here at the Pet Sustainability Coalition. And I know it can be confusing and it can be difficult, but we're so excited about this partnership and to work with all of you on it. So we hope if there's anything we can do, please don't hesitate to drop a line and let us help you on this journey. But thank you so much, Jenna, for joining us today and for all of your wisdom. We'll be sending out the slide deck and how to get in touch with Jenna after this call. And thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.